Then if I slip and break my foot, stop throwing that up here, bro. Now you look stupid. Now everyone around you is looking at you like, oh, you're a idiot.
But I guess with this first kind of quick story, I do want to pass the question off specifically to people who are maybe more frequent concert goers. Have you personally seen that there are more and more instances like this? Or do you think there's just increased visibility on stuff like this because of the rise of social media? Or on the other hand, with the rise of social media, does more of this happen because people are like, oh, I could do something and it might go viral? Or I guess final question for the people that are complaining about the things that we talked about, are people becoming too sensitive to what crowd etiquette is? Any and all thoughts? Let me know. In business news, the future of the American working class is hanging by a thread in this election. And no, I'm not talking about like a Trump versus Biden scenario, though that would be important as well. Rather, I want to take a hard look at the race for the presidency of the United Auto Workers, or UAW, one of the oldest and most influential unions Uncle Sam ever expelled out of its body. Since its founding in 1935, the UAW has branched out to more than just vehicles, organizing sectors from hospitals and universities to publishers and aerospace companies, with more than 600 local unions taking on some 1,000 employers. But ever since it peaked at close to 2 million members in the late 70s, the UAW has declined, enjoying an active membership today of just 400,000 people in the US, Canada, and Puerto Rico. And this is due to a bunch of factors, including an economic crisis and the stripping away of labor protections by Reagan, as well as deindustrialization brought about by foreign competition from the likes of Volkswagen, Toyota, and Nissan, all of which hit the automotive industry especially hard, forcing the UAW to make concessions on wages, benefits, and job security. It was mirroring trends across the rest of the economy. Most notably, how the share of U.S. workers in a union now stands at just 10%, the lowest since the Bureau of Labor Statistics began gathering data 4 decades ago. When you just look at private sector workers, that share drops to a meager 6%. But for many workers in the UAW, none of this was inevitable. They feel let down by corrupt, complacent union leadership that's closer to the companies they should be fighting against and the workers they should be advocating for. And when I say corrupt, understand, I mean literally. Because for the past 5 years, the UAW has been wading through this swamp of fraud and embezzlement convictions that has taken down 2 former presidents as well as over a dozen top officials. With the former presidents Gary Jones and Dennis Williams wasting millions of dollars in membership dues on things like vacations, going golfing, champagne, lavish dinners, fancy cigars, and Palm Spring villas. As well as just some absurd and random expenses like $95,000 worth of backpacks with the former secretary-treasurer's name on them to be handed out at conferences. You know, necessities. And then on top of all that, union leaders were caught taking bribes from Fiat Chrysler in exchange for concessions on contract negotiations for more than 8 years. So with all this coming to light, you had a lot of workers going, all right, the union needs a deep clean. Let's start with the election process. Or because normally, delegates just pick the leadership at a convention, meaning the decision-making process was tainted by favoritism and didn't always reflect the wishes of the rank and file. But in 2021, there was an overwhelmingly supported referendum changing the union's constitution to allow for direct election of leaders, meaning that one member gets one vote. And last November, the first such election took place, with the incumbent, Ray Curry, standing up against the progressive reformer, Shawn Fain. Right, and Fain is an electrician by trade from Indiana, where he began working at a Chrysler plant in 1994 and has been a union member ever since. And as the corruption scandals were unfolding, he was an outspoken voice against Curry's administration caucus, basically the equivalent of a political party inside the union. Because not only did it oppose one member, one vote, it also ruled the UAW for more than 70 years, and reformers like Fain argued that it's lost touch with rank and file, pointing out that Curry makes around $200,000 per year, yet still gave himself a raise last year and increased pensions for staff at the Detroit headquarters, a move seen as a favor ahead of the election. And then at a convention last summer, delegates initially voted to raise pay for striking workers from $400 per week to up to $500. But in the final hours of the meeting, after some delegates had left, the admin caucus snuck in a motion to reverse the increase, which is especially egregious when you factor in this internal audit obtained by The Intercept showing that leaders significantly understated the value of their union assets to their members, telling them that the strike fund was worth $815 million, which, yes, a lot, but it was also several hundreds of millions short of its real value. And very key thing there, that undervaluation put it below the $850 million threshold that would automatically reduce membership dues. So basically, you had the leadership using an accounting trick to squeeze more money out of the rank and file. Additionally, many reformers argue that the admin caucus has floundered on recent strikes, with 3,000 striking workers at a Volvo plant in Virginia rejecting 3 contracts proposed by union negotiators before narrowly accepting the 4th, and around 10,000 workers on strike against Deere, shutting down 2 union proposals and then taking the 3rd. Then, with the shift toward electric vehicles, critics say the union hasn't done enough to stop car companies from leaving workers behind, right? Because as gas-powered engines get phased out and old factories shut down, battery plants are popping up in the anti-union South instead. So you have Fain and his party, Members United, calling for a return to the days when the UAW set the standard for the working class in America, and saying if they get elected, they'll be more aggressive and confrontational with employers, make more ambitious, uncompromising demands, and stick it out with striking workers for longer.
The days of UAW leadership selling out your strikes are going to be over. The days of making you vote on concessionary contracts are over. We're not going to settle for the scraps anymore. We're going to get back to setting the standard for the entire working class.
So what we saw is after the first round of voting wrapped up in November, Members United emerged with 2 national vice presidents, 3 regional directors, and a secretary-treasurer. Meaning if Fain gets elected, reformers will hold a majority on the 14-member International Executive Board for the first time in history. Something that would be absolutely massive for progressive labor activists who not long ago took over another of America's most powerful unions, the International Brotherhood of Teamsters. With a new leadership there taking a much more aggressive posture and organizing to combat consolidation and wage deflation in the transportation and shipping industry. So if the UAW follows suit, not only will this make a big splash in labor politics, but it'll also determine the union's position in upcoming negotiations, which is incredibly important because contract negotiations with the big 3 automakers, General Motors, Ford, and Chrysler, they're all scheduled for this summer. With all of that actually bringing us to the most recent news that all of this hinges on the race between Fain and Curry, where their contest went to a runoff vote, and the count for that started this month with Fain leading by 505 votes. But he hasn't won just yet because there's about 600 challenge ballots that need to be audited by an independent monitor, and that's still ongoing. So any day now, the final results are going to come out, and union members across North America are holding their breath in anticipation. And then, great news for gamers and anyone who knows one, Nexus.gg, the easiest way to get the games that you want, is a fantastic sponsor of today's show. I've set up a shop with Nexus at nexus.gg/Phil DeFranco, and it doesn't matter what platform you use, add months to an Xbox Game Pass membership, charge up your Nintendo eShop, or even reload your Robux, which if you have a kid, or maybe you're a kid at heart, you'll be needing those for Roblox. And these gift cards are the perfect gift for gamers, giving them the choice to try out the new indie game or just get more character skins. They're also a great treat for yourself. And I've got some good games on my Nexus too. I can get the brand new Resident Evil 4 remake right now. Also, if you've missed some of the modern classics, be sure to check out The Last of Us and Elden Ring. Or if you're looking for something different, check out Last Epoch. It's an action RPG that got me hooked this month. But yeah, main thing, go to nexus.gg/Phil DeFranco to get some of my favorite games. And thank you to my friends over at Nexus for sponsoring this video. And then in political news, ladies and gentlemen, it is that time again. It is time to talk about drugs. And specifically, this is the second part of our series on psychedelic therapies. Right, in part 1, we did a deep dive into the science of these treatments. I'll also link to it down below. And there, we talked to Matthew Johnson, a leading scientist in the field, who explained why psychedelic therapies like ketamine, MDMA, and psilocybin are so much more effective at actually helping people struggling with mental health issues. And among the many other powerful insights, Johnson really highlighted the thesis of the series that we're doing and why we're doing it. The American people and lawmakers are catching on to what science has shown us for many, many years. But as the federal government approves more therapies and an increasing number of states legalize them, Johnson highlighted the importance of ensuring safety. Right, well, we have a ton of research showing how successful these drugs can be. They come from controlled studies with extensive screening, preparation, and follow-up care in line with very structured federal regulations. But when states legalize these therapeutic treatments, they have to create their own rules and regulations and design their own safety mechanisms. And that's an absolutely huge undertaking because all of this is very new. For example, on January 1st, Oregon officially became the first ever state to legalize the use of psilocybin, aka magic mushrooms, for therapeutic use. That after voters approved a ballot measure back in 2020. But services aren't yet being provided because the state only just opened up applications for licenses on January 2nd, and there are 4 different licenses they have to review and approve: manufacturers, testing labs, service centers, and therapy facilitators. Right, and to that point, while states that approve or propose similar laws will have Oregon to look to, Oregon doesn't really have other blueprints to draw from, at least in the United States at the state level. We're talking about designing rules and regulations for something that has basically never been done before, and all under the added pressure of everyone watching and scrutinizing. So to try to get a better idea of this whole process, we talked to Angie Albee, the Oregon Psilocybin Services Section Manager at Oregon Health Authority. She's been helping lead the process, and she told us that in order to create these policies from scratch and to be the first to forge a path many others will likely follow, she and her team have been gathering a lot of input. So in addition to collecting feedback from relevant government agencies, advisory boards, and committees, they've also been hearing from a ton of different organizations and community members, with Albee explaining that they've really gone at this with a focus on equity and ensuring they hear voices from underserved people and underserved populations.
I think first and foremost, we have a responsibility to ensure that we're really speaking with those communities that have been most impacted by the war on drugs. And so making sure that we're speaking with communities of color about, their experiences.
And that intake has gone beyond public hearings and sessions. Albee's team has also met with various groups as they want to provide feedback and held community circles with members of the indigenous community and others who don't necessarily want to speak in a public setting.
We really met with folks that had experience for centuries in practicing with psilocybin from all over the world, and also from those places where psilocybin is legal. I think that we've done a really great job at a robust rulemaking process where there hasn't been anything to draw from other than cannabis regulation, which is a very different policy structure than psilocybin services and the work that we're doing.
And on that last point, while Albee says that looking at cannabis legalization has been helpful in some ways, it's also very different. Right? Cannabis laws are structured around drug policy and a dispensary model. You go into a dispensary, a guy named Greg with super red eyes sells you weed and you leave. By contrast, Oregon's psilocybin law is centered on health policy, right? You go to a service center, licensed professionals do intake and preparation, administer a regulated amount of psilocybin. They guide you through a therapy and provide support after. So cannabis and psilocybin regulations might share similarities for growing, testing, and distributing the products, but the psilocybin law at its core is centered around health, so there has to be a much bigger focus on the safety of patients.
In our rules, there's some examples. The informed consent process is very important for clients to understand what to expect. What are the potential benefits? What are the potential